Welcome to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your host, Betsy Fentress. I'm thrilled to have with us Jeffrey Bruno, an award-winning photographer who has traversed many of the national Eucharistic pilgrimages during this year of Eucharistic revival, including ones that our beloved TCA chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, has been part of, and also documenting the sacred vows of the Sisters of Life, consecrated virgins, priestly ordinations, canonizations, beatifications, and so many other moments. Jeff, thanks for making time for us today.
Thank you very much, Betsy. It is a pleasure to be here. Great to have this conversation.
So you did not start off as a photographer. From what I've gathered, you started off in the heavy metal scene in New York City, right?
Yeah, I was in the music industry for most of my life up until my mid-30s, and then I had a kind of an existential crisis, and and then I went on a search, I guess you could say, and was looking for purpose and meaning in life. And I ended up through a radical reversion experience coming into the faith. And that pretty much everything that happened at that point in time, it was 2004, kind of dictated how the rest of my life unfolded. So I was eternally grateful for that. So it's
You moved near a Catholic church sort of without knowing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I look backwards, it's like then I could see God's
right.
hand in so many different things, but, at the time when I was a little kid, it's like, I mean, I was the one kid in class when I was like 7 years old. If you ask, what are you going to be when you grow up? I was like, I was going to be a musician. I was going to have a big boat and I was going to have a big family. And that's all. I was very driven and very determined from a very young age. And I had put all my eggs in that basket, and I had kind of rose to, where I thought I would want it to be, in the music industry as a musician and as a co-producer and a producer. And then I found out that actually it was completely empty. It was none of the promise of, the worldly promises, and none of what I thought, would satisfy me ended up doing that. And again, praise God, it's like I was able to, have that experience of searching and discerning. And I wasn't what you, I guess at the time when I was kind of just before this conversion, I was at a very dark point. And I didn't think that God existed. And I kind of went on I don't know what it was. Somebody had prompted me, and this is actually something for everybody. Somebody just told me, hey, you should go to mass. And that's all it took, so it's like, sometimes you might think, like you tell somebody, hey, I'll pray for you, should say a prayer about that. Just say the simple things sometimes, because sometimes it's the grace of the Holy Spirit through those simple things that you say will get the person to where they need to be. So, don't think you need some big fancy discourse, even though it's helpful to have that too. But just saying, if you got nothing but something simple to say to somebody who's in a situation, say it.
I saw a really moving clip of you. You sort of just plopped yourself down in church and said, okay.
Yeah.
And you really felt this warm, loving
Oh yeah. No, that's
embrace.
It's amazing. And it's really defies words, that whole experience. I didn't think God existed. But at the same time, I was raised Catholic. I guess I wanted to know if God existed, and I had nothing and nowhere else to turn at this point in time in my life. And I started. Exactly. We serendipitously, or God kind of moved it. We moved about 2 blocks from a church, and so I'd walk over there in the morning, and I'd go, and I'd be like, I had nothing else going on, so I was like, God, first off, I don't know if you're really there. I don't really think you're there. But if you are there, I really would like to know. But also one other thing is like, if you are there, I don't love you, because I was thinking of it, reflecting. I was like, well, the first commandment is love God. And I was like, well, I don't love God. I don't even think he's there. So it's kind of like, I'm kind of like stuck. And then, all of my head thinking and all that type of stuff kind of all just got blown right out the window when one day I received the Blessed Sacrament after I'd gone to confession. I was going through the motions in a way, I guess you could say. But at the same time, I think that maybe I wasn't going through the motions, but here's the Holy Spirit was kind of guiding me towards this. And I knelt down after that this one time when I received the Blessed Sacrament, and I felt, I can't even really describe it, but I just felt this totality of love and this mercy and this embrace and this presence that just is completely, it just it swept me away. And when I realized at that point that, not only was there a God, but he was talking to me. And I was just like, oof. And so, yeah. And then at that point, I walked out of the church, I'm like, well, what do you
Now
want me
what?
to do? So, and that actually kind of leads to some other things maybe we'll discuss. But I did a lot of web development and computer stuff, like in my early days. That was one of my claims to fame in the music business, is that I was like the one guy that knew how to program things. And because when I was a kid, I was also heavily involved in computers and whatnot. So um, I looked at the Catholic internet back in 2004, and it was a train wreck, like most of the internet. And I decided that I was going to save, like the Catholic internet. I was going to be a pioneer of the Catholic internet and started building websites and things like that. And yeah, and that kind of led to photography, because there were no pictures for the websites at the time. So I bought a camera and started taking pictures of things. And so pretty much everything that I do now is, I pray it's God's will, number one, and I try to discern that daily. But it definitely was all, I was set on this path by that encounter, and by that yeah, at that time, so it kind of all began there. And it didn't take pictures before, I didn't write before, I didn't do anything else before. It's kind of like, so.
Well, your pictures are really stunning, and I know that you kind of got your leap into fame by going to the beatification of Pope John Paul II,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
got a
yeah,
lucky break from the Vatican
sure did. Which is,
police.
that's
And you have a picture of Pope Benedict that went
yeah,
viral all over the
yeah,
world.
yeah.
And so once that happened, did you just think, okay, I'm a Catholic photographer, and I'm going to really devote my life to this exclusively?
It's well, first off, it is a craft. It's like, for
Mm.
anything that you do in life, there's skill involved, there's knowledge involved, things like that. um I'd say it was kind of 50-50. It's like, because it's like, I believe in, I guess, what you, in my case, and I do it badly, but perpetual discernment. It's like, I really, whatever he wants me to do, that's what I want to do. And if he wants me to do this, I'll do this. But if he wants me to do something different, if it's going to change, that's okay. It's like, I don't, it doesn't, it's not about photography for me. Like, in other words, it's like, I don't, if I lost my faith today, I would hang up the camera tomorrow. It's like, it's just like, I have it, the only reason I shoot or I take photographs is to try to show the beauty and the mission of the church. That's the only reason, the only purpose, in my, to me. Um, am I a Catholic photographer? Yeah. But, by definition I am, but I don't, I don't know. I'm not sure if I think of myself so much in that department in that way.
Yeah, Flannery O'Connor used to say that. I'm a Catholic and I'm a writer, right? So you're a Catholic and you're a photographer. Catholic first, right?
Interesting.
So you've spent months on the Eucharistic pilgrimage with pilgrims, bishops, people kneeling. What strikes you most about that time and that experience?
Well, to begin with, it was one of the most, to date, the greatest privilege of my life. I'll just put it like that.
Wow.
The thing that strikes me most, I mean, that's kind of easy in a way, but it's also sounds maybe really simple, but just to be in the presence of the Lord for that much time.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it's not like going to an adoration chapel. Like, and I go to adoration periodically, and it's beautiful, and it's wonderful to be with him there. But to be with him in different communities on the streets of America, in different environments, in different weather, it's a very different, very tangible experience. And you really feel the way I felt, and I've written about it, is that it felt to me perhaps the way it was for the apostles, when they were walking with Christ through the streets of Jerusalem or wherever, because you're on pilgrimage, you're going with the Lord places. It's like, you could say you're carrying him there, but really he's carrying us. It's like we're going with him, to these places. The efficacy of his grace on the communities and people, it's, you just, and to be able to witness the impact of his presence on the lives of the people that you encounter throughout this, it's breathtaking. It's really, and not only, it's great for, it's wonderful for me, just to have the privilege, but and I don't think I did it justice, in covering it. It's like, because this is so much to say and so much to tell and so much you could show about, it's just so, I mean, super long-winded answer to a simple question: his presence.
His presence. Well,
Yeah.
you wrote about this on your Substack where you say, all drawn by the same thing, not an idea, but a presence.
Mm.
And so, particularly in the streets of Manhattan, which is kind of a different animal than,
Yep.
being on the Appalachian Trail or something.
Mm.
What's it like to have all these people staring who are not Catholics, not believers, staring at this monstrance with our Lord in it, being
Sure,
held up high, gold robes and candles and altar boys? What's it?
sure.
What do you see in the people that are staring?
I see the faces of the people that saw Jesus in Jerusalem. I'm telling you, it's like it echoes that so much. The curiosity, the wonder,
The
and also
wonder.
it's like this. And again, it's like one of the things is like to see it is one thing, and you're right. A lot of people just see it; they see it for what it is, just as you
Mhm.
described. And I think that but his presence is there, so his presence has effect. It's like I think that a lot of the things we talk about this day and age about is the word revival gets thrown around a lot, and at the same time there's polls and data that suggest otherwise. And yet, from my time in the streets and in churches and around the country, I see something is happening. There is definitely a spark of renewal is alive. And yeah, maybe revival. It's like things have changed, things are different. But that being said, I think it directly coincides with the pilgrimages, because I think that you can't bring him through the streets of America without nothing happening. It's like something happens because of him, because of his presence, because of the grace that he has.
Yeah.
So it's like, people encounter him at different levels depending upon where they are in their walk of faith. Some people might not be Christian. Like, like you're going down a city street and you get, you're going through the barrio, and it's like this whole area where it's, a very, very mixed bag of different types of people. You got everything from, criminals to saints. It's like the whole array of humanity is there. And so people are in different places. The grace is going to affect them differently. And I don't know that those are stories I'll never hear. None of us will probably, but I just think that, it's I think that the feeling that you have when you're processing with him, especially in environments where you're maybe more of an oddity, is humility. I think that you feel humbled to be with him in that environment. It's not pride, and I don't mean pride in the bad way of the word, but it's not that. It's you're humbled to be present. It's like you're called to be there, because if you're there, you're called. It's like, if you're processing with him, you were called to be there. And just again, the honor, the privilege, nothing but humbling, and you can kind of see it in the people when they're processing the joy. It's like, it's unreal. It's like, it's just like this palpable, and of course there is, it's because, I mean, he's the author of the universe, the author of joy, of beauty, of everything. So it's like, you're in the presence of the divine, of what the after, what heaven will be like. Oh, goodness gracious. It's just so much there. So, yeah.
So I want to talk about your Substack because
Oh, sure. Yeah.
you have so many beautiful subjects that you tackle. So as a freelance journalist, sometimes we see your pictures at various outlets, but on Substack, you also write. And
Mm.
it's really almost like poetry, Jeff. It's just it's amazing. And I want to talk about two subjects. The first is the
Yeah.
nuns. You're drawn to the Sisters of Life, consecrated virgins. What's it like to be a male photographer to go in and document this?
Well, I didn't set out to do that. I just want to get that clear.
Yeah.
But I will say this is that, at the same time, um, I think one of the things that comes across very powerfully in religious women in particular is virtue. And virtue is something that the world needs to see. In other words, it's like we could talk about virtue. We could talk about modesty. We could talk about respect and all kinds of different things, and the dignity of, femininity and the feminine genius. We could talk about all of it, but they kind of just proclaim it with their lives. It's like, it's without saying a word, you're getting a lesson in in faith, in devotion, in virtue. It's in charity. Oh, goodness gracious. So, there's something that is uniquely beautiful about, women that are called into religious life. Again, as I, as an echo of Mary, maybe, we're, kind of like a, I don't want to go. I was just at a women's conference, Women's Leadership Forum conference, the Given Institute
Oh,
Forum.
right. Yeah.
And so that was, if you want, if anybody was ever out of place, it was me, because I had to cover that. And it was literally, the ideas were for women, by women, and it was all, and I learned so much, just from being present in that, again, it's like that. I wrote something about that, and I'm still trying to unpack it, but I do wish there was something like that for men. Anyway, but that's my only thing. So anybody's out there who wants to get something started for men like that, contact Jen over at the given and figure out something. That'd be really wonderful. Okay, but back to what you're saying though. I think one of the things also is that in New York, in particular, the Franciscan Sisters of the Renewal, Dominican Sisters, the Sisters of Life, they're very present in the city, and a lot of times they're at things that just they're like at the events that are going on. It's their events, it's their or they're involved with them. So for somebody like me that's looking to tell the Catholic story, and New York is kind of local to me, not super local, but we're a little bit away from it. But it's the logical place to go. And you just naturally encounter them, and then you naturally get drawn into the stories, and naturally, it's the way it goes. Yeah, and it's. I guess also with the Sisters of Life in particular, they are one thing is like as a born and bred New Yorker, there is that the wrong kind of pride coming from me now because they're natively New York, they're founded in New York, and generally. But the thing is that, and actually, I just finished a piece. I'm going to launch it. I'm going to put it out today about that and about this particular thing. Their presence in New York is a response to a grave problem that New York faces, which is its pro-abortion, ultra pro-abortion stance. And it's, I think they just signed into law the assisted suicide thing.
Right.
And of course, they have, in their constitution is, the quote unquote right to abortion. So God responds by granting or bringing grace into places where it's needed. And if they begin there, if they started there, via Cardinal O'Connor, it's a response to that prompting of the Holy Spirit, which is kind of like, again, it's wonderful to see God's his mercy and his grace at work in an area where there is a problem. Like it's a tangible, visible response to something, just like the CFRs. CFRs are also, and they were also a response to a different type of thing that was going on. And again, it's like all this responding grace is such a beautiful thing. Don't know where we're at with that. I was kind of fished around.
No, that was really enlightening, especially as talking about the nuns as a witness with all of this secular horror going on. We have just about a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
What would you say to somebody who wants to get into your line, both from the faith perspective and from a journalism perspective?
Well, it's going to be maybe an unorthodox answer, but I'll say this. I will say the first thing is discern it. Pray, get into a state of grace, daily communion, adoration, rosary, whatever you can do, whatever's within your ability, your capabilities. Abandon yourself to him first off, and see if this is something that you feel called to. If you do, like, and again, it's like you're not necessarily going to get the lightning bolt answer. It's not like that, but if you do feel yourself drawn to it, that's an indication. It's like, especially if you're, prayerful about it and you feel yourself drawn into it. Okay. That's definitely a good place to start. There has never been a better time to start in this line of work because now the kind of independent journalism is something that's becoming a reality for people. So you don't necessarily have to work for anybody else. You can work for yourself. You can start your own Substack. You can run your own social media. You can do your own thing. Again, I just would, put Christ at the very center of it all, always. And then the one thing is that if you do feel drawn to it and called to it and you start learning about it and everything, learn everything, soak it all in, learn from the best that are out there. If you want to learn to take pictures, that I always told people, and this is the way I learned, is look at great pictures and take a lot of pictures. One teaches you how to use the camera, one sharpens your eye. And before you know it, the two start to come together and you'll get good at it. So that's kind of a practical tip. And then the thing is that, with the way it is today, we have such an overabundance of content kind of like in the world. And with AI, there's even more and more content. This is a real chance for, great work to stand out.
Yes.
It's like, I think that, in photography is a particularly interesting genre because it's real people, it's real moments, it's real events, it's separate things. So it is an opportunity. But I'll just say one last thing. Photographers write, and writers take pictures. You got to do the both because the two of them together, super powerful.
Well, you have really enriched our world by your amazing photography and words. And make sure to sign up for Jeffrey Bruno's Substack by visiting Words and Pictures by Jeffrey Bruno. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a delight.
Betsy, thank you very much. God bless.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences, where I am joined by TCA chaplain, Monsignor Roger Landry, to talk about one of the most important and beautiful feasts of the year, the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Can you tell us about the history of this? It dates back many, many centuries.
So the first Christians, Betsy, celebrated that at the end of her earthly life, Mary was brought up, body and soul, into heaven. When Pope Pius the 12th in 1950 declared the dogma of the Assumption of Our Lady, it wasn't as if it were new. And in that document, he traced all the fathers of the church going back into time, some of the various scriptural references, which are indirect, but nevertheless suggestive of Mary's eventual place, crowned with the stars of heaven at her son's eternal right side. And so the tradition of the church was always there. We celebrated last week the feast of St. Dominic, and we remember that Our Lady revealed the rosary to St. Dominic, and as part of the church's prayer for centuries, we would meditate on Mary's Assumption and then her coronation in heaven, which has been part of Catholic piety from the beginning. And then at the request of many bishops all around the world who were saying, against some people who said we have no proof of Mary's being in heaven because Scripture doesn't say it explicitly, Pope Pius XII decided to write the document and declare infallibly the dogma of Mary's Mary's Assumption into heaven 96 years after his predecessor Pius IX had declared the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. And so we've been celebrating it solemnly, not just since 1950, over the last 76 years. We've been celebrating it from before it was officially declared a dogma. But it is a wonderful day, first, in which we celebrate Our Lady, that at the end of her earthly life, the church has never pronounced whether she died or whether she just fell asleep. But honestly, the case is much greater, that she died just like her son did. And then at a certain time period after her death, she was assumed, taken up by God, in other words, not by her own power, not just her soul, but also her body, to her eternal son's right side in heaven, whatever that means once we get into that state. So it's first about Mary, and if we're ever going to be super excited about anybody's winning any triumph, let's just think about our favorite sports team winning the championship, we should be all that more happy about Mary's triumph in life. This is the mother that God the Father chose for his son, and that son from Calvary chose for you and me. Super excited about Mary. The second is it anchors our soul in the clouds, to use the image of the letter to the Hebrews, that Mary's Assumption is a sign of what God wants to happen to us. After we die, we're going to be judged immediately, but eventually there's going to be a general resurrection when we'll be reunited with our bodies, and God wants us, body and soul, like Mary is now, eventually to be at his right side and hers too in heaven. And so it's a feast about heaven in which we recalibrate our interior compass toward the things that are going to last forever, the things that Mary always sought. And so like the Ascension of Jesus, normally in the month of May, so the Assumption in August is a time in which we're contemplating heaven. And then third and lastly, it's an opportunity for us to learn from Mary that road to heaven, that path with her to be raised up by the Lord, to have a heart that contemplates God's words like she did, to have a will that seeks to do whatever the Lord himself asks, which was Mary's valedictory address at the wedding feast of Cana, do whatever he tells you. That we look to Mary as the great disciple, as the teacher about how to do the apostolate, as somebody who intercedes for us now so that we might receive everything her son wishes to give us. And so that's why the Assumption is so important.
Why is it the Eastern Church calls it the Dormition of Mary, but why is that so much more prominent and we don't use that term that much?
So dormition's a little confusing, right? Dormire in Latin and in Italian and most of the Romance languages means to sleep. We have a dormitory, for example, where we go to sleep. And on the early Christian graves in the first centuries, they would say, like in your case, Elizabeth, dormit in pace, that she's sleeping in peace, because she is going to be reawakened one day to be fully alive with the Lord. And her body will be sort of up, from where we've placed it, etc. So the Eastern always talked about the dormition, that she fell asleep and she was reawakened and taken body and soul. We in the West just use the term death more frequently, all the way up until the 1700s with St. Alphonsus Liguori, the great founder of the Redemptorists, whose feast was a couple weeks ago at the beginning of August. He argued theologically that because Mary had been free from all stain of original sin from the first moment of her conception, and that death was a consequence of sin, Mary would never have died. And so she just would have closed her eyes as if she was falling asleep. And then the next time she opened them, she'd just continue on in life, assumed by Father, Son, and Holy Spirit to heaven. But I've always found that weak, as much as I love St. Alphonsus, and most of the saints and the doctors over the course of the century had argued that Mary had died. After all, Jesus, the blessed fruit of her womb, was totally sinless too, and he died on Golgotha. So it's not incompatible that Mary herself would have died at the end of her life. The church doesn't make a pronouncement on it. It just says at the end of her earthly life, whether she just fell asleep or whether she died for a minute or for a few days, for example, like her son, before she was raised and assumed. We don't know, and we don't have to know. What we do know is that she's at Jesus' right side, where she's interceding for us. And as St. John Paul II wrote in his beautiful document, The Mother of the Redeemer, Mary reigns in heaven by serving, that for her to reign is to serve. And she's interceding and praying for us so that we'll be able to follow her Son, who is the way, all the way back to the place where he's gone to prepare not just for Mary, but for everyone who lives and dies in him.
That's a great explanation of that whole dormition issue that I've been wondering about for years. So thank you, and thank you for helping us to celebrate this beautiful feast.
Happy Solemnity of the Assumption, likewise, Betsy, to you and to all our listeners.
Thank you, Monsignor. Welcome to Conversations with Consequences, now on EWTN Radio. I'm your host, Betsy Fentress.
And I'm Lee Sneed.
And we are very happy to have a friend of the show back with us today, Erika Bachiochi, Catholic mother, professor, and author of The Rights of Women, Reclaiming a Lost Vision, Catholic Ideas for a Secular World. And Erika, we're so excited to chat with you about your upcoming conference happening next month in Rochester, New York, A Better Way Forward for Women. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Always good to see you too.
So the conference really wraps in this monumental year we're in as a nation, a 250th celebration, but you have a different take on what's also happening as a celebration to commemorate. Tell us about why this conference is happening in September on this date.
Yeah, so I am always a person of kind of hope and always trying to look forward to build anew, especially, with the work of the Holy Spirit being present at all times and all places. And so I often worry about those of our friends who despair of the American founding, despair of the American project. And I say we keep building on the good and make corrections, to those things that weren't so good. And the same can be true for the early, for the women's movement as a whole, and the early women's movement that was founded, at Seneca Falls in 1848, and then held several national conventions in the years that followed, including a 20th anniversary in 1870. And so we are commemorating that movement in the hopes of kind of reclaiming the women's movement as a whole that, as we all know, has gone dreadfully astray in many important ways. And so as someone who studies the cause of women's rights, as a legal theorist from a Catholic perspective, who has just written this book and has seen take shape around me and among friends and peers and scholars, a real sort of need, I think, to come out of all of our individual work and the good work that each of the speakers is doing and kind of come together in solidarity to present an alternative vision for women than the one that is kind of hegemonic in progressive feminism, and to basically take the movement back, so to speak. And so that's what we're doing in Rochester in mid-September. And we are filling up fast, but definitely have room for people who might like to come join us.
That's great. I'm looking forward. I'm lucky enough to be be able to find time in my schedule to attend the conference. I'm looking so forward to seeing, people I've known for a long time, people who I know through Substack. And Substack, I'm still sort of figuring out, but I am obsessed with it. And I love fair disputations. And I love all the different women who are contributing and the style of the writing and the conversation, the really mutual like exchange of ideas that I see on Substack. Did your Substack success have something to do with the idea for having this conference?
Yeah, so in a way, I mean, Fair Disputations, for those who don't know, is an online journal that I started and brought Serena Sigalato on very quickly to be our editor. It's started at Abigail Adams Institute, which is kind of a humanistic institute that serves Harvard. We then were kind of brought into the School for Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. When I created there, I was brought on as a professor of practice to teach a course called Women and Rights in Western Political Thought, and was asked to kind of found an initiative there on women in civic life and thought. And so Fair Disputations is now within this kind of civic education program that's there at ASU as one of these great civic institutes that are growing up in all of the kind of public universities in red and purple states, trying to reclaim kind of civic education for our country. And so in part, it's like there's all this great work that authors of Fair Disputations are doing, those who are contributing. And then there's also this time when our country is looking at trying to rehabilitate civic education. And it seems as though the space for women is taken up by those who, aren't so crazy about the American founding, first and foremost, but then also try to downplay some of the real beautiful truths that the early Americans rights movement set forth in its own Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. I mean, one of the most incredible things as a scholar is to see that there are those who, want to bring attention to the Declaration for some reasons, and then also just basically don't even showcase the resolutions aspect, which is literally grounding women's rights in natural law. It's quoting Blackstone, William Blackstone, for the proposition that, all law needs to be grounded in eternal law, and that God made us equal, obviously, and different, but equal in dignity, and therefore, goes on to make resolutions about with those claims. So I just think that it's like sort of a time when it makes sense to begin again. And sort of, as I've said many times now, is like a phoenix, to see a phoenix rising from the ashes. That is really modern feminism, I think, in terms of its, seeing abortion rights as kind of its sine qua non, as like, having transgenderism come and really become really part and parcel of progressive feminism, which is so odd to me. And so what Fair Disputations has done is really bring together like kind of the heroic TERFs, those who have, across the pond have really pushed back against transgender ideology as radical feminists, and then has brought together Catholics and Christians and other, non-believers who on this side of the pond who are interested in really kind of forging ahead with a robust anthropology that makes sense of who we are as human beings, as who we are as women, as who we are as individuals, and keeping that tension together. And so trying to do really good intellectual work to reground advocacy for women, who I should say, because sometimes people say, why do we need advocacy for women? It's because of, I think, two things. One is women's natural vulnerability, because of our, men's superior strength, women's being, relatively weaker than men in most all cases. And then also, of course, the vulnerability that comes with childbearing. Plus, and the important plus is important is like, as Catholics, it's Genesis 3, it's the fall, the way in which men and women were supposed to serve one another gets all screwed up and disordered. And part of that, as people have seen throughout all time, and we could quote all sorts of great people like Newman and Augustine, etc., is that, and Genesis itself, is that man can tend to lord over women and be really of harm to women. And so therefore we need, especially for women who don't have good men around them, we need advocacy for women. And we see this so much in our day with pornography, prostitution, sex trafficking, surrogacy. And then I would include also abortion, of course, and the threat of trans identifying men in women's spaces. So there's a lot of places where women need advocates today.
And just to back up for a little clarification for our listeners who might not know about about this movement in the UK, the TERF movement. Could you explain what that is and what that acronym stands for?
Sure, yeah. So trans exclusive radical feminists were the first. It's funny, some Catholics who, aren't students of the cause of women's rights tend to think radical feminism means like the most radical of feminists. And so those say who are the ones who are pushing aside, women as embodied, biologically different from men, or some other radicals in terms of abortion. But what's interesting about radical feminists, the way I would describe them, is that they actually take seriously the fall. They don't call it the fall, but they take seriously men and women's embodied differences. And then they just see the fall as like the constant state. So men are always kind of the violent aggressors and women are always the victims. Obviously, those things are true in some cases. And so then you need to respond to them. But that's what a radical feminist is. And so these TERFs, who are also call themselves gender critical feminists, are basically pushing back against the idea that a woman can be kind of anything, anyone can claim the status or the word woman based on their own interior feelings. And the TERFs saying, no, it is a biological status, actually. It's a reproductive status. It's, the fact that women have the large gametes and produce the large gametes in their body and are capable of childbearing. And that makes women vulnerable. And therefore, there ought to be protections. And so Catholics and radical feminists actually agree on a lot. What's fascinating about radical feminists, too, is that there's all sorts of pushback against things like the pill and abortion and prostitution and pornography. So the women in the 1980s who allied with some Christians on pornography were radical feminists. And I would just put just one more thing, because I think it's been so awesome to see, is that we have at Fair Disputations a bunch of different kind of debates and dialogues between radical feminists and Catholic theologians or philosophers on the nature of sex, on the nature of this kind of agreement. And so what it's caused the radical feminists to do is go and read documents like Mulieris Dignitatum of John Paul II and say, wait a second, I had no idea that Catholicism kind of got these kind of questions at the core. And just to bring my own story in here, is that I too was on the other side of this question and then came to read John Paul II and was so enlivened, I was so amazed that this Catholic could understand kind of the core problems really impacting women. It really got me to start thinking in a serious way about Catholicism. And, hopefully it's doing the same for some of our readers as well.
I just wanted to put a plug in that EWTN Journey Home just ran a piece on Erika's conversion story where she really goes into this. It's a beautiful segment. I wanted to ask, we just had this tragedy this week in Massachusetts where they signed a bill allowing abortion up to birth. And so that's kind of the antithesis of what's going on with your movement. But tell us a little bit. I know there's a platform that you have a list of things on your website for the conference where you talk about all the things that you agree on that you want to promote. Can you go through a few of those for us?
Yeah. So I actually am a resident of Massachusetts. I was invited by the Boston Globe to give a statement, which they did not quote. But yeah, it's a real kind of abomination, as we've seen in many of the kind of the bluish of blue states, that they think they have to, move forward all the way toward, abortion on demand with no restrictions, with no oversight, done by anyone, not even medical personnel. It's like the Wild West. And we see this in surrogacy, we see this in IVF, and it's kind of a horror that women aren't seeing this. Therefore, the need for something like our movement. So yes, we are creating our invitation, which you can find on our website, abetterwayforwardforwomen.org. Puts all of this in the perspective or in the context, of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and then basically makes claims, which of course we know from our own history, that there are men and women who called our own founders and called our own country, people in our own country, to sort of honor that statement, but also find the complete expression of the truth that we are all created equal. And I think obviously we see that in slavery, and then we see that in the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement. And so one of the things that we say is that we, all share an equal dignity, and that makes us responsible to one another and for one another and to one another, that there's an interdependence at the core of, and that rights and responsibilities are always interdependent. And that was true with the founding generation, but sometimes things are taken out of context, are pulled. And we have this idea on both left and right now that really radical autonomy was there from the very start. When, if you look at at the great legal cases, if you look at, the work of constitutional law and in founding documents, that human law is always understood to be grounded in eternal truths. That's true at the American founding. It's also true in the early women's movement. So that's kind of what we're building upon. So in this statement, then we talk about injustices, to the human person, including the child in the womb, and also to women, to men, to families, etc. So I'll read one of them. We're working on these, and we're also writing resolutions that we will then sign and proclaim in public. Not giving the details out about that quite yet, but the very first of these injustices is that it is unjust for children to be poisoned or dismembered as they develop in the safety of their mother's wombs, to be chemically or surgically castrated in their formative years, or for adults to place their own desires ahead of the needs for children. The needs of children. And then just, to make sure that there's an understanding of like the other side of that, which makes us, advocates for women as well as children, as well as the whole vulnerable. Another one of the injustices is it is unjust for women to bear all responsibility for pregnancy and childbearing, or for society to champion those who are unencumbered by responsibilities as the standard bearers of equality. And so really trying to push, aside that idea that either equality or freedom are sort of best encompassed by sort of this radical liberal idea of autonomy, where, we are each kind of born on our own and take care of ourselves as though we're, as Thomas Hobbes says, mushrooms growing up of our own accord, rather than that we are born into families, that we always need each other, that we depend on each other for all goods in life, and that we are then responsible for one another. Of course, Lee, your husband Carter, has been incredibly articulate about these great truths of the human person that are just so basic if we just but look around and see how it is that we depend upon one another all the time. So it's really bringing that core insight of interdependence and the way in which we need each other, that we belong to one another, and that we also must serve one another, especially the vulnerable, into the core of this declaration of interdependence, as we're calling it.
That's amazing, because I was just thinking, this is a really great segue, Erica, because I was just thinking about people. I mean, a lot of people are doing a lot of great work on this topic of interdependence, and a lot of it's rooted in McIntyre and all these different things.
Right.
But we've got, so like with my husband, a man, Carter, Chris Kazor, Carl Truman are some people come to mind. But then I think about you, I think about Angela Franks, I think about Leah Lebreska Sargent. And is there, we're having this women's declaration, this women's conference. Is there something different that you see women scholars bringing to the conversation of interdependence that maybe men don't? I mean, we're talking about world's greatest minds here. I hate to pit anyone against each other, but is there something special that women bring, a different aspect, just anything that separates their work from the work of, say, their male colleagues?
That's a really great question. Not sure I can answer it so quickly, because
Sure.
I am a great admirer of all of the men and the work of the men that you mentioned, and we are kind of simpatico and sort of depend on each other for our work. As you mentioned, McIntyre, I think all of us very much are in the line of Alistair McIntyre and working there. I guess I would say what occurs to me as someone who has studied deeply the work of Mary Wollstonecraft, that she, as a woman who was, the oldest of 6 children, had a difficult situation in her own family, then really cared for as best she could her younger brothers and sisters. She, had very different insights about interdependence and about kind of the duties of care that we owe to one another than the men at the same time when she was writing. So of course, she's talking about natural rights. John Locke was talking about natural rights. But when you read them, you could say superficially, there's some similarities here. But then when you actually go in and read the text, you see that there are great differences, that Mary Wollstonecraft gets very clearly that we are in relation to one another always. So yes, we are individuals, but we are also always in relation to one another as mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, citizens. And so that relationality is part and parcel, I think, of just how women see the world. And it's something that as Catholics, we know men are very much called to, but it just is something that's more basic to who it is we are as human beings. And it may just be the basic fact of menses, that each month from the time of 12 or 13 or 14, a girl realizes that she has the capacity for motherhood. And, that is a great capacity, but it's also one that is, I think makes a lot of girls very fearful at this point, right? Because there aren't a lot of people who are shepherding women along in that way so that they can see that they can both really, as all of us have done, take very seriously their great sort of privilege of being a woman and this great capacity, but then also do other great and noble work in the world and contribute to the public square or in our homes and our communities. And that's what we're trying to kind of hold together in a way that I think both the far left and the far right are sort of very much splitting apart.
So Lee mentioned some of the people that are going to be featured at the conference. I wanted to specifically talk about the people from Britain. So I know Ayaan Hirsi Ali is some are joining virtually, and you have Mary Harrington, you have Louise Perry. I'm particularly interested in how the American women forged this alliance with the British women. And the First Things cover story this month is Tomophobia by Mary Harrington, where she talks about the discovery of natural law. And so can you talk about that alliance and how these women are moving toward a sort of Thomistic view? They're probably all on different pathways.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a way in which the Anglo-American alliance is a very strong one. We also have sort of Australians in the mix too. Louise is now actually relocated to Australia, which is her part of her background. So these are great friends of mine. I actually, in terms of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, we just met last week, where I had the opportunity of interviewing her for this conference. So we'll be showing that pre-recorded interview there, and she has become certainly an ally. But with regard to Mary and Louise, who are great friends of mine, I guess I will just say, in terms of the story, which we tell a little bit. I'm going to be on Socrates in the City with Mary Harrington, which should be coming out soon. I filmed it a couple weeks ago when I was in London. She contacted me out of the blue, hearing that I had The Rights of Women. I think it was probably in production. I don't think it was out yet. And then she went on to be sort of, I would say, my very best reader, reading every single footnote with great interest.
Wow.
And then when she went on to write Feminism Against Progress, she would send me her chapters as she would write them. And she's an incredibly brilliant, not only woman, but also really fast writer. And so they would kind of come out from her great mind and they'd arrive in my email box. And then I had the opportunity to read and really think with her about these things. So we, over the course of kind of sharing ideas, sharing intellectual life together, we become very dear friends, and we push each other in different ways, right, to think about different things. And so I am, delighted to see that she has found Thomas Aquinas and the important aspects of, I guess I would say, formal and final causality. And what that really means is just asking questions about who we are and what our end is. And these questions are ones that someone like a Mary Wollstonecraft really understood very implicitly in talking about what are the kinds of beings women are. Well, we're rational creatures. And what are they? We're rational creatures who are embodied and therefore potentially always, daughters, but then also potentially mothers, wives, etc. But then we also are destined for eternity. And that's really clear in her work. And so when I was saying before that Mary Wollstonecraft is a much better Enlightenment figure than these others who kind of cut off very much these kinds of questions of formal and final cause that Mary and those of us who are trying to just bring back to the question of, like, what is a woman? What is a woman for? What is a human being for? These are the kinds of things that we already see in someone like Mary Wollstonecraft's work, which is why I'm, in my book, The Rights of Women, trying to retrieve that work. So we are all sort of doing different things. Everyone has very different gifts. And what's great about this time is I think about sort of theories of my theory of change is that you have to have women in all different disciplines. You have to have, or people in all different disciplines, in all different kind of realms of life. So some of us are in the academy, like myself and Angela Franks and Abigail Favali, Rachel Coleman, others. Some are journalists like Mary Harrington and Louise Perry, who are incredibly gifted journalists. And then others are advocates and activists. And all of those layers are starting now to, I think, align in a really important way so that you can start to see a movement forming. So that was already happening. And so now we're just really bringing it together in person so that we can, fortify friendships, but also fortify one another and give kind of an affirmative case for a new vision of what it is to be a woman out to the world, one that is pro-marriage, pro-life, pro-family, and that, really speaks to kind of the great good that women bring to the public square, especially when they're well-formed. So we have Freya India coming to talk about kind of what's going on with Gen Z women. And then we have a couple of different women, kind of matriarchs, who have been forming women in schools and other places to really respond to her and talk about what it is, the formation of women. What do girls and women need to become, women of excellence in any sphere of their life, in their homes, in workplaces, and to contribute to the public square as well.
When I read, it's something that I know, but when I read other articles that say are not sort of in this sort of crowd, and you're just hammered over the idea that there's no sense of teleology, like it has been completely abandoned. And again, that, but then when you just read it today, or it's just so striking. And so I love the idea that you really want to, bring that back, and that the other women you're working with are dealing with that too. And do you feel like it's mostly an effort to make that more real, like a real idea, to explain it more fully to the friendly readers and listeners? Or do you hope that, what are your dreams like for the future for that? Like, are you outreaching to people who have abandoned that, who've grown up with it, who don't even have any sense of that kind of classical idea of like, there is actually an end that we're meant for? And I will make it a double question by asking, what do you see for the future of the conference?
Yeah. Yeah. So what we're trying to do, I think, is speak to a really broad audience. And so all of the, videos will go up online, not the Q&A, of course, because we want to have great, robust discussion and debate. There's a lot of different people coming, kind of from all different, that we have kind of people on the center left, people on the center right, if those words mean anything anymore. And so really trying to bring together kind of a great swath of people who are interested in this. I think there are people who are coming with questions for sure. And then there are people who sort of see the vision very clearly and are part of, those who are building it. One of the things people keep asking me is like, well, what are you going to do in the future? What are you going to do? And I have all sorts of ideas.
Yeah, sure.
But there's what I take great kind of hope and confidence in is the great work that the women who are coming to speak are already doing. So we have concurrent panels, and one of the panels is a panel on healthcare. And I'll tell you, the women who are coming to this panel are doing incredible work on women's health. And don't we all know how important the work in women's health is? Because for so long we've been just reliant on just putting girls on the pill, having sort of this abortion-backed, sexual revolution be like the way that we all think about, the world and how we exist in it. And it's really, I think, and a lot of my work has been arguing this, is that by relying on those sort of technologies in that way, we have not done the great work of understanding the human body, of really loving, the female body in particular, loving what she's capable of, and then going to root causes when there are issues so that we can restore the health of women's fertility. But that, of course, women's fertility is not all there is about a woman, right? And so I think it's kind of trying to really frame, again, a positive vision that has been kind of understood in all these women's lives really independently, and then that they've come together. So one of the most striking things that I think you'll see if you know the women's stories is that many of these women, not all for sure, but many of the women have come out of progressive feminism. So that's true of me now 30 years ago. That's true of Abigail Favale. She's told her story. That's certainly true of Louise and Mary, and true of others as well. And so having been there and kind of seen that, but then made their own independent critiques, given their own, backgrounds, their own intellectual life, etc., and then be able to turn and say, wait, women deserve something more, and then to build that intellectual framework that does call upon, the great sort of eternal truths of the past, but also has to answer to new pressing problems in technology, in the moral landscape we find ourselves in. And then I think women have always been those who have offered great solutions in times of real crisis. So, and just trying to, as John Paul II said, really trying to humanize our culture. And that's what we're really trying to do as well.
To learn more about Erika Bachiochi and this amazing conference taking place in just about a month in Rochester, New York, make sure you visit A Better Way Forward for Women catholicasociation.org. To learn more about the Catholic Association, visit thecatholicassociation.org to follow everything we do in radio, TV, print, online, and in our local communities.
Thank you, Erika.
Thanks. Bye-bye.